Since the dawn of the atomic age, we've sought to reduce the risk of war by maintaining a strong deterrent and by seeking genuine arms control. Deterrence means simply this: making sure any adversary who thinks about attacking the United States or our allies or our vital interests concludes that the risks to him outweigh any potential gains. Once he understands that, he won't attack. We maintain the peace through our strength. Weakness only invites aggression.
Piali, you might think I'm crazy to say this, but I honestly 100% agree with President Ronald Reagan there. Well, there's something to be said both in international relations, but also in our spiritual practice for deriving peace from strength.
I have to agree with with him too.
Oh, what a beautiful morning. Oh, what a beautiful day. Everything's peaceful and empty. Everything will be okay.
This is A Mom and a Monk, a podcast where we take a look at life, culture, current events, science, art and technology, spirituality and philosophy, in short, the whole of samsara and also nirvana. And yes, when we have to, sometimes also politics, but we look at it all through the lens of the Buddha's wisdom, trying to understand how to incorporate and integrate the Buddha's teachings into our lives in this ever-evolving modern world we live in. Hello and welcome to the second episode of A Mom and a Monk.
Hello, everybody. My name is Piali Tenzin Shudin, and I'm a mom to a 9-year-old and a Dharma practitioner.
And my name is Losang Danyo. I'm a monk, and I have no one to answer to except my own karma. Today we're going to be asking the question, is peace simply the absence of war? And, well, since it most likely isn't, then, well, what is peace? And how does it relate to the Buddhist teachings? And how did the Buddha talk about peace, which is indeed essential theme throughout the entirety of the Buddhist literature and for each practitioner? Our goal is to achieve peace, right? So Piali, how about you? What questions do you have today?
A question that my daughter asks quite regularly is, why don't we just stop the war and then everything will be over? So I think that these big questions, they actually seem very important for us to reflect on, and especially as a mom educating my little daughter to differentiate between peace and just putting a halt to the war that's happening right now.
Okay, well, what do you think, Piali? Our former president, Ronald Reagan, has suggested that we achieve peace through strength. And if you look now back to our current president, he has many modes of communication with the public that he prefers, but he loves this Truth Social. So, of course, we have the White House also echoing President Reagan, peace through strength. It's the American way. I mean, and look at this guy, whether you love him or hate him, he sure is a good looking guy, isn't he?
Completely subjective there.
Well, hey, maybe our meditation last week got me to start considering his humanity a little more. And so if I can picture him as a little baby, I can see his handsome, cute little features. Okay.
I'm strongly upwardly on the path.
Yeah, well, it's and he is also, to some degree making a point there. But this is now a discussion about peace in relation to the international community, right? Peace meaning not being at war with each other. As I see it, we can really talk about peace in three main ways, right? One is in terms of interpersonal relations, whether that's international or just in your smaller community or even in your own family, peace with your husband and your daughter. That's all external peace, right? There's also internal peace. Basic level of internal peace would be just having a sense of emotional well-being, emotional balance, right? Kind of having a good mental and emotional hygiene where you're able to keep a cool mind as you go throughout your life, even in the midst of changing circumstances. That's a kind of peace. Then there's another kind of peace, and this is what the Buddha most frequently talked about, which is the peace of liberation or nirvana. So we can get into each of those, but let's just start back to what you were saying about how you want to help your daughter to understand what peace means. So what do you think about that basic notion of peace through strength, and how does it relate to what you are teaching your daughter about both the world but also her own heart and mind?
Yeah, I think with peace through strength, this is really a conversation that comes up quite a lot in our home. She's 9 years old. Right now she's in the fourth grade, so finally she's began experiencing bullying. And perhaps in some regard, I don't really know, maybe she's a bully too. I'm not too sure, but
Well, it could be, and that often can happen, right? It's not really hard to fall into the bully's role, you know?
well, yeah. So she has often talked about what to do in her school. There was a kid that was ignoring her, but also friends with her when she needed something or when they had snacks together, and then excluded her. And little Kaya came home and told me, actually, like, "Mommy, do something. You have to go to school and yell at her." And I explained to her that it's not my role to go and yell. And then her biggest question was like, "Well, how are you going to protect me?" And so, we brainstormed. Like, doing nothing was not helpful. Hurting the child or yelling at the child was just not appropriate. And then again, uh, acknowledging her without getting another adult from the school or school staff involved also seemed a little bit inappropriate. So the best middle way was to actually go through a staff member and perhaps have the children and perhaps their parents, if they were there or available, to come in and talk about what was going on. So yes, I think that we also talked about different ways of being like slightly wrathful, which is like this middle path right here was really acknowledging and holding the little child accountable, but also a lot of truth telling for everybody's perspective, and then sort of trying to resolve it the best as we could, whether they're friends or perhaps they ignore each other then on. But there needed to be an intervention. So I think an intervention could look like a lot of different things. So I think that when it comes from, I mean, that could be a strength right there, or like, finding peace through strength. I mean, there's the use of violence sometimes, to put an end to someone doing a bad thing, or bringing it up through higher authorities in the school.
And what you're essentially getting at is that strength can manifest in many different ways, but a real peace, right? A real peace within this now being a school community of third graders, is it right? Fourth graders. To maintain their peace, we're talking about solving this issue through dialogue. And that connects to exactly what His Holiness the Dalai Lama has been promoting for decades.
If we analyze events in 20th century, marvelous things also there. I think the greatest human history, because of the century, most important century of human history. But meantime, that century becomes century of bloodshed, century of violence. Beginning of this 21st century, it is some sort of unhealthy things happen. These are symptoms of the past mistake or past negligence. I think generally, you see, everywhere, I think people's desire, peace, is really growing. I think many parts of the world, people, I think really fed up about violence. So then, peace will not bring just a slogan. I often tell him, genuine peace must come through inner peace, in emotional level, full of hatred, full of suspicion, full of, anger. How can develop peace? So genuine peace must start firstly from within. Then that also, when we talk world peace cannot materialize with some kind of resolution like the United Nations or the national level. Peace must create by people. When we talk people, people means a collection of individuals. So ultimately, peace must start from individual level. You should create inner peace, then share with your family members. So develop peace family level. Then one family, 10 family, 100 family, that way develop peace in the community. That's the way to start. So I often used to telling, 20th century becomes century of bloodshed. Now this 21st century should be century of dialogue. In order to carry dialogue, you need self-confidence, tremendous willpower.
It made the point clear, because what I'm hearing your story with your daughter and this bully, we shouldn't call her a bully, right? Or him, just a person who was acting in a way that harmed your daughter, that she didn't like, right? But we can see that because of the peace that you're cultivating within yourself, right, and your husband and himself, now that allows you to create peace in your family, right? You're able to help to guide your daughter, to help her figure out a good solution that won't create more conflict. Instead of escalating, finding a way to resolve it through dialogue. And as His Holiness mentions, that it only can happen with tremendous self-confidence. That's strength, right? Self-confidence is a kind of strength. So Ronald Reagan was making that speech in the context of the Cold War, right? That was the Cold War, meaning they never actually used violence, right? So that strength was actually a strength of being able to say, okay, we have the power to be wrathful if we need to be violent, but we're restraining ourselves, right? So it's actually a power of restraint. Whereas the current situation in the US, well, the people in charge seem to think that strength needs to actually be somehow, as they keep saying, kinetic, right? There has to be a kinetic show of force. But the wisdom of His Holiness is that actually we can show force through our intelligence, through our ability to restrain ourselves, through our ability to recognize that all of us will benefit much more if we can come to some kind of agreement through dialogue. Thank you for sharing that story. So what do you think in general now about those three tiers of peace, sort of the social, interpersonal, the personal, but kind of operating on an emotional level of day-to-day life, and then the sort of deeper spiritual, we could say, of the ultimate peace of nirvana?
Um, this is a really good way of looking at how our inner peace actually moves outwards. Truly. But then, of course, the perception can change because one is in the very conventional level. Of course, there's the inner level, then the conventional level, and then ultimately trying to really actualize or have the experiential understanding that things don't exist objectively and all arise from dependent origination. And so I do feel like our inner work really does move outwards in the way how we engage with our community or at our jobs, or how we shape, policies in the world, and um, also how we design our towns, and how we relate to our neighbors in the typical sense of like the people living right next door to us, or maybe perhaps the town over, or the city next door, and so on and so forth, like countries and nations and things like that.
Right. So, kind of on every level of human engineering, human community building, human interaction altogether, right? We see that the state of our mind is manifesting in the decisions we make, the way that we relate to others. But let's just start even more basic, go back to the basic question here. What is peace?
This is a wonderful question that Kaya asked me, which is really like, if the war stopped, won't there be peace?
Right, right.
So it's sort of like looking in a magnifying glass to see what's there if the war just abruptly stopped, Is that really real peace? I mean, outwardly, it's quiet. However, the real peace is the presence of deep understanding, individuals who want to build bridges. There's care involved, there's empathy, and of course, altruism, like the genuine care for others and to really build these bridges of communication. So it seems a little bit more deliberate, but it's also natural. It's a natural care for one another. It's not forced, like, okay, we are going to do this meeting and, try to be friends, like how children are made to be friends after a fight in school. Like, go ahead, shake your hands,
Right.
so you won't
Go
fight
hug it.
again.
Go hug and make up, right? Go hug
Right,
and make up.
exactly.
Yeah.
Sort of like side eyeing, like, oh. I've done that with my sister before when I was a child, so I really clearly
Mm,
remember that. And so the way how I explain this to my daughter is that peace, inner peace, it comes from within, and then it's the way how we are in relationship with one another. So it's basically, picture yourself as a steady mountain
mm,
of others cherishing, where you constantly remember that with all of your, activities, your speech, even your thoughts, you're thinking about others. And so, despite things going wrong, which will happen because we're in samsara 100% is going to disappoint you. So, keeping that in mind, as a Buddhist mom to a little sprouting Dharma kid, just to remind her that in samsara, things will often go wrong. And so, throughout all of that, we're going to be a mountain and confront things and each obstacle with calmness. So make calm your superpower. That's what I tell my daughter.
Oh, well, we need a superpower, right? So, of course, the traditional Buddhist terms talk about, right, we have like the 37 branches of enlightenment or the 37 wings of enlightenment, right? And those are like the collection of superpowers, and they help us to develop that firm mountain. And even we talk about concentration as being stable like a mountain, right? So I think that's such a good analogy to use, that we can have real peace, but it's not just stopping a war, right? A ceasefire is not a stable peace, right? So that that does take some, what was the word you used, that you have to be, it's like it has to be active. You used a slightly different word, right?
Deliberate. Yeah.
Yes, very nice. Thank you. So, right, it has to be very deliberate, right? And this is so, it's so clear how that's what's needed for the international global picture. It's also needed for our internal picture, and even in the full sense of perfect peace of nirvana. We talk about samsara. Samsara is by nature suffering, as you said, 100% chance of having a problem today, right? No matter what you forecast for the weather, there's 100% chance you can forecast samsara accurately. Today you will run into a problem.
Absolutely.
Well, it's not good enough to just, temporarily be, okay, today it's nice day, the sun's out, it's nice and breezy. Today I have, some nice ice cream, I have, my tasty rice and dal, whatever you have that you're enjoying. Because there's still the possibility for a problem to arise again. That's the problem with samsara, possibility for suffering to arise again. So it's the same like you were describing when you are in war, and if you just stop dropping bombs for a few days or years even, there's still the chance for a conflict to erupt again, right? So this is why peace has to be deliberate, it has to be active, it has to be maintained, right? Maintained throughout time. And that's also true with the middle level of peace, like it's still an internal level, but that sort of that day-to-day emotional world that we experience internally. So, but we are both trying to learn a bit about CU learning, but essentially what it is a curriculum for children ages K through 12, and even being adapted for younger toddlers and preschool kids, which was encouraged by His Holiness the Dalai Lama and developed by a team of professors and researchers at Emory University. And what it does is, well, if you know about SEL, social and emotional learning, it just takes it to the next level. The founder of SEL itself, Daniel Goleman, describes C learning as SEL 2.0. And of course, it is an acronym. It stands for social, emotional, and ethical learning. So it adds in a dimension there of not just ethics, but, well, let's just look at what it is composed of. So it's composed of a framework, and then from that framework, there are a series of curricula for different age ranges. And each of those curricula contains a variety of exercises to help develop these core competencies in emotional awareness and, well, several different things. So you have these 3 domains and 3 dimensions. So the 3 dimensions are awareness, compassion, and engagement. And the 3 domains are on the personal level, the societal level, and then the systems level. And so each of those each of those crosses, as you see in this grid here of 9 squares, where there is now a core competency. So C learning is a series of exercises to be done inside classrooms in schools throughout the world to help children develop these core competencies. And I just think it's such a brilliant curriculum and framework. And one of the things they talk about is being in the okay zone, or falling into the high zone or the low zone. Piali, do you remember that part of the C learning framework?
Yes, I do.
So how does that relate to peace, do you think? Can you explain about it a little bit?
Yeah, I feel like this really, well, it relates to the way how we can actually try to stably be this mountain, and when we aren't, we identify it through different signs and then come back. So I think that this, and what Kaya comes home because she has C learning in her school once a week. So what she actually tells me is that she learns how to regulate, and that's something we actually practice together. So at home, or perhaps when we're outside and she's going through a hard time, or frustrated, or having a meltdown because she's tired or hungry or hangry, we co-regulate together, to sit, breathe. If she can't connect with her breath and is just really upset, then we try to touch something, feel something, an object or perhaps a wall, and push against it. And then we try to work through a naming what we are feeling. And perhaps she's too upset to even state how she's feeling. So that's when I could maybe just say, like, it looks like you're feeling a little frustrated, huh? Maybe it's disappointing. And then it helps her make sense of her inner world and reduces her overwhelm because she feels like she can relate to someone, which is, her mom. And then we work through little reset tools. And it's great that she actually learns this in school because she actually has them on her fingertips. We actually check in about this, and she's very excited to tell me how she learned how to either take slow breaths or maybe smell something or blow a candle on our altar or maybe shake her body or take a short walk. And this really like helps her build awareness around her body also, which is she's able to identify where she feels it, which is really amazing. Just the other day we were around another child that she plays with, and I didn't really quite know what went on in their playtime, and she came up to me and she's like, "Mommy, I just feel like this pain in my throat." I asked her what was going on. I'm like, "Are you getting sick?" And she said, "No, I just feel like this girl was quite mean and I didn't really stand up for myself."
I see. So she was identifying the emotion in her body.
Exactly. And it was great that she caught it kind of early on instead of having resentments. And we both were whispering, not in a rude way. People weren't watching us, but I was just like, "Well, what do you want to do about it?" And she's like, "Well, I don't want to be mean." I'm like, "That's a good idea." But
Good
maybe,
place to start.
maybe
That's your advice you gave last week. If you can't help, at least don't harm, right?
exactly. And she said, "Well, do you think I should maybe tell her?" I was like, "Yeah, how would you tell her? Maybe just act like I'm her." And then she stated it, and then we just kind of like polished up like the key elements and making it into I statements. Like, I'm feeling a little hurt because X, Y, and Z. But just the body awareness, like realizing that, it hurt in her throat, which, to her really gave her, it was information that she wasn't using her speech to express how she's feeling inside, and really nipping it in the bud right there by getting it out really prevented her from having like destructive thoughts in her mind or feeling resentful or feeling upset. So it was really incredible how, she processed all of this. I also think one other thing about sea learning, which is really great, is just like normalizing the ups and downs so that there's no shame or embarrassment around it. So just letting them know it's okay to feel angry, sad, scared, frustrated. The feelings are allowed, but not all behaviors are.
Yeah, because hey, guess what? We're human beings, and that's part of being a human being. And so it does very much acknowledge that. And I loved how much you shared about how, I mean, that whole story, but just how well she is really able to use these competencies of sea learning. And it's right. If you again look at this graphic here, then there's the self-awareness, right, on the personal level. That's awareness on the personal dimension, a personal domain. And she's able to see this emotion arise, feel it in her body. And then you talked about the different reset practices, right? So that's like the engagement. So when you talked about how Kaio actually didn't want to hurt this person, right? That shows then another competency that she's really picking up, which is, I mean, she didn't want to be mean, is how she said it, right? So that's showing the compassion, right? Compassion as it relates to the domain of social or societal domain. And then that's really connecting back to now even the global level, because that's where any kind of dialogue, negotiation, any effort to develop or maintain peace with another nation, it has to start there. Because as His Holiness the Dalai Lama really often points out, everything that we want to achieve, we have to be able to trust each other. We have to have trust. And to have trust in one another, we have to have a sense of friendliness, of openness, right? Because if we're constantly paranoid about, oh, are they really trying to cheat me, trick me? what do they really think, right? If we don't just trust them on a human level, then of course we're not going to be able to make any good faith. And where does that sense of openness? That comes from compassion, the recognition of their basic humanity, that they don't want to suffer, they don't want to be harmed. So we shouldn't be mean to them. I don't want to be mean to them, right? As Kaya said. So that's really wonderful. So I'm talking so much about C learning because, well, I'm here in the midst of it, in this program that I'm doing right now. But so it's obviously on the mind, but also because it really does put, even for adults, it's meant for kids, but it's just as important for us to understand as adults. It puts so much of what the Buddhist teachings help us to cultivate and understand into a framework and a language that, for me personally, I frankly feel is just easier to understand and use than a lot of the Buddhist teachings. I've been at this Buddhism thing for over 20 years, and clearly I'm dedicated to it. I'm a monk, but it still seems quite foreign sometimes.
I think for me, peace really has, from a Buddhist perspective and from a practitioner lens, it really is nirvana, which is complete freedom. And this is not without obstacles still present. The external factors are still there, but it's really the removal of afflictive obscurations, which is our mind clinging on to things to be objectively real. So, for example, I explained this to a child or perhaps like a family member, like believing that Donald Trump is existing just as he is in time and space as a president. Uh, but the truth is, his term is going to end. We know that this war will end. It feels very stuck right now, like this is it. Also, there's an overwhelm of just the worries of how this is going to affect our planet. I mean, of course, like the immediate stuff, which is like the lack of gas, or the prices spiking up for gas, and other things like that. So I think that when we are overwhelmed with the worries of everything that's happening right now, it can appear that it will exist like this in time and space. And it's inherently there. Like he is problematic, or the way how I see him existing in that state permanently, and everyone can see it. But the truth is, like, that's not the case. Um, so I feel like the freedom of really seeing how things are coming into being through causes and conditions, and that they're not going to last forever, and also seeing how things are not inherently existing, that itself, like the real true experiential level of understanding this, is peace. Of course, I have not seen that. I know theoretically, but there's so many subtle
I'm with you on that
nuances.
one, sister. I am in a very tumultuous state. Well, maybe I have to ask if it's okay if I give a slight applause. You're showing that you're definitely studying very well. So that is a very good explanation as far as I'm concerned about what peace really means in Buddhist philosophy and practice. So the way I sometimes see it is it's really something we're doing internally on a deep level, a fundamental rewiring of not just our brains, a fundamental rewiring of our minds and the entire continuity of our consciousness, which has, according to Buddhist theory, existed even before this one lifetime, but has always existed together with, as you're talking about, particular sets of afflictive cognitions, so particular sets of distorted cognitions, which we often call the afflictive emotions, or at the root of it all, a fundamental type of distortion, an ignorance, distorted cognition or ignorance. So I mean, honestly, to even imagine it, to even imagine being, again, because it's the complete pacification. This is a term that we have in the philosophy text that we study in the monasteries when we're studying the Abhisamaila Aramkara, or the Ornament of Clear Realizations. The first chapter, there's a section where we learn about what they call the fundamental limit of reality. And the fundamental limit of reality, the Buddha, he 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 encourages, he orders, frankly, the Buddha orders the bodhisattvas to not manifest, do not actualize the fundamental limit of reality yet, not until you do a few things like completely perfect the Buddha fields, and until you completely ripen the minds of sentient beings. So until then, which means that you've really developed your practice, your mind, all the way to the point of being ready to achieve Buddhahood, then you can actualize this fundamental limit of reality. And what is the fundamental limit of reality? Well, it's defined as being the deep, intimate pacification of pervasive conditioned suffering. And what is pervasive conditioned suffering? That is, right, these 5 contaminated aggregates, this body and mind that I have right now, that you have right now, that are the condition for us to experience suffering, right? They are the basic condition for us to experience suffering. So until we completely rewire that, until we completely transform those 5 contaminated aggregates, right? Body, the form, the affect, the discriminations, all the other mental factors, cognitive factors, and the main consciousness, until we completely reform those, then we're still going to have the potential to suffer again, and we won't be at peace. Because again, just like with war, just like with international relations, you might have a few moments, whether it's decades long, hey, maybe even centuries long, of not actively fighting. But as long as there's that potential again for something to spark, right, for something to ignite, then we can't really say we're at peace. So Piali, now I'll ask you a question. I actually think, now my mind is a very immature, I'm almost like a child. So the child in me thinks, you hear about peace and it's kind of like, and that sounds pretty boring. What do you think? How do you think about peace? Is it boring? I mean, even what I just talked about, you're talking about rewiring your cognitions, your whole body and mind. So what are you left with? Is there just going to be like, you're just going to be a zombie? You're going to be a corpse from then on? That sounds really dull and boring.
Kaya once asked me, "Isn't meditation boring?" Yeah, it's interesting. It reminds me of that question. But no, I don't think peace is boring. I feel like peace is freedom. It's spaciousness, feeling alive, feeling the ability of experiencing this expanse. I feel like I obviously haven't had the level of peace as a bodhisattva, but there are moments of great peace that we can feel. For instance, I often share this with some people, especially in the Dharma context, where I describe how one of the biggest the biggest experiences of peace I felt was when Kaya was brought to me after my very complicated birth, and I had an emergency C-section. So the whole thing leading up to it was just wild, as most births are. It's never what you're going to expect it to be.
Right.
And I had to have an emergency C-section. So here I had like 7 humongous, large injections to my spine. It's the
Oh,
anesthesia. And then
wow.
uh, got cut open layer by layer. The doctor was very kind and had interesting bedside manners and told me exactly what he was doing. And then I suddenly heard this like, wah, this crying. And they took her away, they cleaned her, and then she was crying, and they brought her to me. And I was laying, not knowing if I'll ever be able to walk again. And I saw her little face, and this was the little being that was swimming in my stomach. And of course, like I was just cut open. I was still open. They were still stitching me back. And in that moment, I felt the greatest sense of peace. Like if I never walked again, even if I died from whatever infection, I would still be content and at peace because I gave birth to this little masterpiece. It's the one thing I did right, which is bringing life into this world. So yeah, I feel like peace comes from within. It doesn't look like anything specific. It's not your Instagram perfect picture of a person sitting on a mountain, because even in those places, you can be haunted by various memories, things that you've done, shame, blame, all those things. But as a mother, I feel like the peace, inner peace, is something that allows me to meet life fully with patience, love, presence. Yeah, it's
Right.
not boring.
What a riveting story. Yeah, and I'm sure it hasn't been a moment of boring since with raising your daughter from that moment. And I also think that there's a lot in the Buddhist teachings that can show us how peace or nirvana are not dull in any sense whatsoever. So I'll just share from one sutta, again from the Pali Canon here. And here the Buddha, he's talking in the Uttana Sutta, which is the sutta on vigilance. And he says, rouse yourself, sit up. What good is there in sleeping? For those afflicted by the disease of suffering, who are struck by the arrow of craving, what sleep is there? Rouse yourself, sit up. Resolutely train yourself to attain peace. So he's really saying, you have to be highly aroused to attain peace. So I think this is really important, going back to the C learning framework and that high zone, low zone, okay zone, the zone of resilience is another way to say it, that we have to recognize you can have high arousal in terms of like some kind of high energy in your mind, right? In your experience, but still very peaceful, right? Because peace is not the absence of excitement, but it's the absence of disturbance, right? It's the absence of something that's really disturbing your mind, but you can have high arousal, rouse yourself, be energized. It's the same even when we talk about shamatha meditation, right? Shamatha, which is also called serenity meditation in English, where the mind is single-pointedly focused on one object, but it has to be so with endowed with a mindfulness that is vivid and sharp, stable, but it's also vivid, right? So this is how the teachings on cultivating shamatha are taught. And I think that can be a really common misunderstanding for people, that if you're doing single-pointed meditation, focused on the breath or on a visualization or whatever your object, then you're just rest, right? And in one sense, that is rest. Yeah, it's rest because you're not being disturbed, right? It's a restful state, but also very highly energized and vivid, where you see the object that you're focused on very clearly, very sharply. So what I'll do then for my final comment to read from His Holiness when he gives his aspiration for global demilitarization. So he says, from the book, Imagine All the People, one of my dreams, but it is only a dream, is global demilitarization. Wherever there are human beings, one is bound to find a few mischievous persons. So when necessary, force may be used. Police forces would still be needed, but that should be based on a joint international effort. We could start on a regional level and create a very efficient collective force to watch over specific region of the world with a few thousand people from each country. Eventually, these regional forces would join an international organization. But there should be no more military forces belonging to individual nations. Well, Piali, what do you think of this dream of His Holiness? Is it a pipe dream, or Is it an aspiration to achieve?
This reminds me about how research actually shows where that countries and nations where police are unarmed, there is actually less violence, and it's not really just because they're not carrying guns, but it reflects a broader social system which has low inequality, stronger trust, which is something that you touched upon earlier in this conversation, as well as, of course, strict gun laws.
Well, thank you. Right. I definitely have. Sorry. Thank you so much for sharing that, Piali. I really can see that it is possible because of that research that you just mentioned and we can see in the world. So we can do it. I think it's not just a pipe dream. I think we can do it. Why? Because I can do it, right? You can do it. Kaya can do it. So if the three of us can do it, then our friends can do it, our families can do it, their connections can do it. And hey, you know what? In just 6 steps, you've got Ayatollah Khomeini, Donald Trump, Bibi Netanyahu also doing it. Okay, and Piali, I did just want to add one more thing for those who are really interested in Buddhist practice and are listening. You know, it can be very hard sometimes to have this core competency of awareness, of self-awareness. Even for me, you know, I had been struggling with noticing that I've been too easygoing with kind of letting myself follow on my desires. And I talked with one of my teachers about this, and she said to me, I said to her, you know, it's difficult because when I was first starting to learn Buddhism, I felt like my mind was so much more hectic, so much more disturbed. Now I feel so much more peaceful from the years of study and practice, and that it's harder to feel like there's, you know, something that needs to be addressed, that there's something in me that I need to remove or fix. And she said, well, you know what? Maybe you have to think again about what peace really means. And then I realized that was a very powerful comment or a piece of advice, because it helped me to realize, you know, before I really had terrible anger problems, right? So my mind was so unpeaceful because of the power of that anger. And yes, because the Buddhist teachings do work through practicing metta or loving kindness and compassion or karuna for over 20 years, I've been able to reduce a lot of that anger. Not completely, but, you know, to a degree that at least I feel more peaceful. But then there's still all these other mental afflictions, right? So much attachment, so much desire, so much craving that's still there. So even though on some level I've been able to get a little bit of space from the intensity of that anger, I need to have what I realized is I need greater self-awareness to really see. And this is exactly what happened to the Buddha. Of course, his awareness was much, much deeper, and his issue was much, much subtler. But he realized when he was seeking enlightenment and he stepped out from the palace, he first went to 2 teachers, right? Uddaka Ramaputta. And he learned from them these incredibly deep meditative states, right? The meditation of infinite consciousness and the meditation of neither perception nor non-perception, right? These are beyond the 4 jhanas even. These are the formless absorptions. And he still had enough self-awareness to realize, well, gosh, gee, my mind is super subtle, peaceful, blissful from this meditation, but it's still not liberation. It's still not the ultimate peace of nirvana. And if we remember, right, the 4 seals, all produced phenomena are impermanent, all contaminated phenomena are suffering, all phenomena are empty and selfless. Transcending sorrow is peace. So the Buddha realized he hadn't fully transcended sorrow, even with a relatively, something that we couldn't even imagine. I can't even imagine the state of the meditation of infinite consciousness, right? I mean, just no perception of matter whatsoever, of your body whatsoever. Your mind is completely internally focused on this bright, blissful, vast state of infinite consciousness. And still he could recognize that he wasn't beyond sorrow. He didn't have peace.